Tears, outrage, and a powerful message. Inonge Wina just delivered a heartbreaking tribute to Edgar Lungu and a bold attack on the government. You won't believe what she said. In a powerful and emotional address, former Zambian Vice President Inonge Wina mourns the late President Edgar Lungu while publicly criticizing the government for the unexplained delay in organizing his funeral. Her words struck a chord with the Zambian people, sending shockwaves through the political scene. Was this a failure of protocol or something deeper? Watch as Wina delivers a tribute that Zambia will never forget. Don't miss the full speech, reactions, and what this means for Zambia's political future. Stay tuned, subscribe, and hit the bell for more updates on Zambian politics, Edgar Lungu's legacy, and Inonge Wina's latest revelations. The legacy of Edgar Lungu. 1.1 Early life and legal foundations. Born on November 11, 1956, in Ndola, a city nestled in Zambia's Copperbelt province, Edgar Chagwa Lungu's early life was shaped by modest beginnings and a strong academic drive. He earned a law degree from the University of Zambia in 1981, later practicing law under the Law Association of Zambia. His legal career, however, was not without turbulence. His license was suspended in 2010 due to professional misconduct. Yet, this setback did not deter his ambitions. Instead, it marked the beginning of a pivot toward politics. 1.2 Political ascent and the Sata era. Lungu's political career began in earnest when he joined the Patriotic Front (PF), a party founded by Michael Sata. He served in various ministerial roles, including Minister of Home Affairs, Minister of Defense, and Minister of Justice. His loyalty and pragmatism earned him a place in Sata's inner circle. When Sata passed away in 2014, Lungu emerged as the PF's presidential candidate after a fierce internal power struggle. 1.3 Presidency 2015 to 2021. Lungu assumed the presidency in January 2015, winning a tightly contested by-election. He secured a full 5-year term in 2016, again defeating opposition leader Hakainde Hichilema. His presidency was marked by a duality: bold infrastructure development and growing authoritarian tendencies. 1.3.1 Infrastructure and economic vision. Lungu prioritized infrastructure development, launching expansive road, airport, and public facility projects. These were often financed through large-scale borrowing, particularly from China. He also sought to diversify Zambia's economy beyond its dependence on copper. 1.3.2 Social and symbolic reforms. He appointed Inonge Wina as Zambia's first female vice president and introduced initiatives like commuting death sentences and establishing a national day of prayer. These moves were seen as efforts to humanize his administration and appeal to Zambia's religious and traditional values. 1.4 Controversies and criticism. Despite his achievements, Lungu's presidency was marred by economic turmoil, political repression, and strained international relations. 1.4.1 Economic decline. By 2020, Zambia defaulted on its international debt, becoming one of the first African nations to do so during the COVID-19 pandemic. Inflation soared, unemployment rose, and public discontent intensified. 1.4.2 Democratic backsliding. Lungu's administration was accused of curtailing media freedoms, suppressing dissent, and manipulating state institutions. Laws like the Cybersecurity and Cybercrimes Act were criticized for stifling online expression. His use of emergency powers during civil unrest raised alarms about authoritarianism. 1.4.3 International isolation. Relations with key Western donors, including the United States and the International Monetary Fund, deteriorated. The IMF even withdrew its resident representative, citing governance concerns. 1.5 Electoral defeat and political comeback. In 2021, Lungu lost the presidential election to Hichilema in a landslide. Initially retreating from politics, he made a comeback in 2023, becoming the leader of a new alliance. However, in December 2024, Zambia's constitutional court ruled him ineligible to run again, citing term limits. 1.6 Death and national reflection. Lungu passed away on June 5, 2025, in Pretoria, South Africa, after receiving specialized medical treatment. His death prompted a wave of national mourning and reflection. Supporters remembered him as a resilient leader who brought infrastructure and stability. Critics recalled a presidency marked by economic hardship and democratic erosion. Inonge Wina, the Iron Matriarch. 2.1 Origins of a trailblazer. Born on April 2, 1941, in Suibumbu village, Senana district, Inonge Wina's early life was shaped by the traditions of Baratsaland and the aspirations of a newly independent Zambia. She attended Barat's National School, now Cambiel Secondary School, before completing her high school education in Los Angeles, California at Santa Monica High School. She later earned a diploma in social work from Santa Monica College and a Bachelor of Arts in History and Sociology from the University of Zambia. Her academic journey, split between continents, gave her a unique worldview, one that would later inform her advocacy for women's rights, social justice, and national unity. 2.2 The social worker who became a stateswoman. Wina's public life began not in politics, but in community service. In the 1970s, she volunteered with women's organizations, eventually becoming president of the Young Women's Christian Association, YWCA. Under her leadership, the PWCA championed women's human rights, leading to the creation of the Victim Support Unit within the Zambia Police Service, a landmark achievement in gender-based violence prevention. In 1996, she was elected national chairperson of the NGO Coordinating Council of Zambia, Gov't, where she led the Red Ribbon Campaign to defend Zambia's constitution in 2000. Her activism made her a household name and a respected voice in civil society. 2.3 Entering the political arena. Wina's transition into politics was a natural evolution of her advocacy. In 2001, she was elected Member of Parliament for Nalolo constituency under the United Party for National Development (UPND). She chaired several parliamentary committees, including the Committee on Human Rights, Gender and Governance and the Women Parliamentary Caucus. Though she lost her seat in 2006, she returned triumphantly in 2011 under the Patriotic Front (PF) banner. President Michael Sata appointed her Minister of Chiefs and Traditional Affairs and later Minister of Gender and Child Development, roles that aligned with her lifelong mission to uplift marginalized communities. 2.4 Breaking the glass ceiling. On January 26, 2015, newly elected President Edgar Lungu appointed Wina as Vice President of the Republic of Zambia, making her the first woman to hold the position in the country's history. Her appointment was more than symbolic. It was a statement about inclusion, resilience, and the evolving face of Zambian leadership. As Vice President, Wina was known for her measured tone, diplomatic finesse, and unwavering commitment to national unity. She often served as a bridge between the executive and civil society and between tradition and progress. 2.5 A Voice of Conscience. Even after leaving office in 2021, Wina remained a respected elder stateswoman. Her appearance at Edgar Lungu's funeral in 2025 was not just a return to the spotlight, it was a moral intervention. Her speech, laced with grief and righteous indignation, reminded the nation of her enduring role as Zambia's conscience. By calling out the government's delayed response and fragmented mourning arrangements, she reignited public discourse on respect, protocol, and political maturity. It was a moment that transcended partisanship and reasserted her place as a guardian of Zambia's democratic values. Perfect. Let's continue building your long-form feature with Chapter 3, The Day of the Speech, a vivid reconstruction of the moment Inonge Wina stepped forward and delivered a tribute that shook Zambia's political and emotional core. Chapter 3, The Day of the Speech ****. 3.1 A Nation on Edge. It was the morning of June 12, 2025 ****, and Lusaka was unusually quiet. The air was thick with grief, but also with anticipation. Former President Edgar Lungu's passing had left a vacuum, not just in leadership, but in national identity. The streets around the Patriotic Front (PF) Secretariat were lined with mourners, many dressed in black, others in green PF regalia, clutching portraits of the late president. The government's delayed response had already stirred unease, and the public was hungry for clarity, for unity, for someone to speak. #####. 3.2 The arrival of Inonge Wina. When Inonge Wina arrived, the atmosphere shifted. At 84 years old, she moved slowly but with unmistakable presence. Cameras clicked. Supporters whispered. She was not just a former vice president. She was a living symbol of Zambia's democratic journey. Her appearance was unannounced, but not unexpected. Many had hoped she would speak. Few anticipated what she would say. 3.3 The setting. PF Secretariat. Lusaka ****. The PF Secretariat had become a makeshift shrine. Banners bearing Lungu's image hung from the walls. Candles flickered beside wreaths. A podium stood at the center, flanked by party officials and family members. The crowd swelled as word spread that Wina would address the nation. Journalists jostled for position. Live streams began broadcasting across the country. ####. 3.4 The speech begins. Wina stepped to the microphone. Her voice, though soft, cut through the murmurs. She began with a tribute. ****, we gather not just to mourn a leader, but to remember a man who gave his life to this country. ***, her words were measured, her tone maternal. She spoke of Lungu's humility, his quiet strength, and his unwavering commitment to peace. But then, her voice cracked. She paused. The crowd leaned in. #####. 3.5 A Turn toward truth. I speak today not only as a colleague, but as a mother of this nation, she said. ***, and I must say what many are afraid to say. ***. What followed was a direct and emotional critique of the government's handling of Lungu's death. She questioned the delay in official announcements, the lack of coordination, and the division of mourning locations. ***, why was the family left in the dark? Why was the nation kept waiting? ***, she asked, her voice rising. The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement. Some wept, others applauded. ####. 3.6 The crowd reacts. Wina's words struck a nerve. For many, they validated what they had felt but could not express. Her speech was not just a eulogy, it was a reckoning. People in the crowd held up signs that read, "Respect our leaders," and ***unity in mourning. Social media lit up with hashtags like #WinaSpeaks and #HonorLungu. ####. 3.7 Media coverage and viral impact. Within hours, clips of the speech were trending across Zambia and beyond. News outlets replayed her remarks. Analysts debated debated their implications. Some praised her courage, others accused her of politicizing grief, but few could deny the power of the moment. One video titled Inonge Wina Mourns Lungu, Zambian VP slams government over Lungu delay, captured the essence of the day and quickly gained traction online. Another, a longer live stream, showed the full context of her remarks and the emotional reactions of those present. Hashtag 3.8 moment etched in memory. As Wina stepped down from the podium, the crowd stood in silence. Some reached out to touch her hand, others simply bowed their heads. It was a moment of collective catharsis, grief, anger, and hope, all wrapped into one. That day, Inonge Wina didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for a nation in mourning, a party in crisis, and a people yearning for dignity. Fantastic. Let's now explore Chapter 4, the speech that shook the nation, where we unpack the language, symbolism, and seismic impact of Inonge Wina's tribute, one that transformed a moment of mourning into a national reckoning. Chapter 4, the speech that shook the nation. 4.1 The anatomy of a moment. Inonge Wina's speech on June 12, 2025 was not just a eulogy, it was a masterclass in political communication, delivered with the gravitas of a stateswoman and the tenderness of a grieving friend. Her words pierced through the fog of official silence. It was a moment that transcended protocol and ignited a national conversation about dignity, legacy, and leadership. 4.2 Language of loss and legacy. Wina began with a tone of reverence. Asterisk, we gather not just to mourn a leader, but to remember a man who gave his life to this country. Asterisk, this opening line set the emotional tone. She invoked collective memory, using inclusive language like we and our nation to draw listeners into a shared space of grief. Her tribute to Lungu was deeply personal, yet universally resonant. She described him as a man of peace who never quarreled with anyone, a phrase that would later trend across social media and be quoted in headlines. 4.3 A shift in tone, from tribute to truth. Roughly halfway through her speech, Wina's tone shifted. Her voice, once steady, began to tremble, not from weakness, but from conviction. She said, I speak today not only as a colleague, but as a mother of this nation, and I must say what many are afraid to say. This rhetorical pivot was powerful. By invoking her maternal identity, she positioned herself as a moral authority. Her critique of the government's delayed response was not framed as political opposition, but as a plea for decency. She asked, asterisk, why was the family left in the dark? Why was the nation kept waiting? Asterisk. These questions were not just logistical, they were symbolic. They challenged the very soul of the state. 4.4 Symbolism and subtext. Wina's speech was rich in symbolism. Her references to dignity in death and unity in mourning were not just about funeral arrangements, they were about national cohesion. Her critique of the divided mourning locations was a metaphor for Zambia's fractured political landscape. She also used silence as a rhetorical device. Several times she paused, letting the weight of her words settle. These pauses were not empty, they were filled with meaning, allowing the audience to absorb the gravity of her message. 4.5 The emotional arc. The emotional trajectory of the speech followed a classic arc. Grief, personal loss, reflection on Lungu's legacy, outrage at the government's inaction, hope for national unity. This structure made the speech not just memorable, but transformative. It allowed listeners to move through their own emotions in tandem with hers. 4.6 Public and political reverberations. The impact was immediate. Within hours, hashtags like hashtag WinaSpeaks, hashtag Honor Lungu, and hashtag Dignity in Death were trending. Political analysts called it asterisk the most consequential speech since Zambia's return to multi-party democracy. Asterisk opposition leaders praised her courage. Even members of the ruling party were forced to respond, some defensively, others with quiet acknowledgement. The speech also reignited debates about how Zambia honors its former leaders. Editorials called for a review of state funeral protocols. Civil society groups demanded transparency and inclusivity in national mourning processes. 4.7 A defining moment in Zambian oratory. In the annals of Zambian political speechmaking, Wina's address now stands alongside the greats. It was not just what she said, but how she said it, measured, mournful, and morally unflinching. It reminded the nation that words, when wielded with integrity, can be instruments of healing and accountability. Let's keep the momentum going with Chapter 5, the government silence, where we examine the timeline of official responses, the public's growing frustration, and the political implications of what wasn't said and when. Hashtag Chapter 5, the government silence. Hashtag 5.1 The clock ticks, but no word comes. When news of Edgar Lungu's death began circulating on June 5, 2025, it wasn't through an official government statement. It was through whispers, social media posts, and unconfirmed reports. Hours passed, then a day, then two. The Patriotic Front (PF) confirmed the news before the government did, prompting confusion and anger. For many Zambians, the silence was deafening. In a country where protocol and respect for former heads of state are deeply ingrained, the delay was not just a procedural lapse, it was a perceived insult. The absence of a clear, unified message from the Ministry of Information or the Office of the President left a vacuum that was quickly filled with speculation, conspiracy theories, and grief-fueled outrage. Hashtag 5.2 fragmented mourning. 2 locations, 1 nation divided. When the government finally responded, it announced that official mourning would be held at 2 separate locations, one organized by the state, the other by the PF. This decision, rather than uniting the country, deepened the divide. Critics saw it as a deliberate attempt to marginalize Lungu's political legacy. Supporters of the late president viewed it as a snub, a refusal to grant him the full honors of a unified state funeral. Inonge Wina, in her now famous speech, called this decision unfortunate and divisive, asking, why 2 places? Why not one Zambia, one mourning? Her words echoed the sentiments of many who felt that the government had failed to rise above political differences in a moment that demanded national unity. Hashtag 5.3 Wina's call for restraint and accountability. Interestingly, Wina later urged the government not to react emotionally to the public's anger. In a televised interview, she said, the heart of a mourner is heavy and their spirit is confused. The words spoken by those in mourning do not always reflect reality. Her message was twofold, a call for empathy from the government and a reminder to the public that grief can distort perception. But even in her appeal for calm, the underlying critique remained. The government's lack of preparedness and sensitivity had created a volatile situation. Hashtag 5.4 political fallout and public backlash. The silence and the fragmented response that followed sparked a wave of backlash. Civil society groups issued statements demanding transparency. Opposition leaders accused the administration of politicizing death. Editorials in major newspapers questioned whether the delay was rooted in bureaucratic inefficiency or political calculation. The ruling party, caught off guard, scrambled to regain control of the narrative. Government spokespersons issued statements emphasizing respect for Lungu's legacy, but the damage had been done. The public had already formed its own conclusions. Hashtag 5.5 a missed opportunity for unity. In moments of national mourning, governments have a rare opportunity to unite the country, to transcend politics and speak to shared values. The delayed response to Lungu's death was, in many eyes, a missed opportunity. Instead of healing, it sowed division. Instead of clarity, it bred confusion. And in that silence, Inonge Wina's voice became the loudest, not because she shouted, but because she spoke when others would not. Political undercurrents. 6.1 A legacy that refuses to fade. Though Edgar Lungu left office in 2021, his influence never truly disappeared. His supporters remained vocal, his infrastructure projects visible, and his political ideology, centered on stability, conservatism, and state-led development, continued to shape public discourse. For the ruling administration, this posed a challenge: how to govern in the shadow of a predecessor whose legacy still loomed large. The government's hesitant response to Lungu's death was interpreted by many as a reflection of this unease. Was it mere bureaucratic delay, or a calculated effort to minimize his posthumous influence? 6.2 The PF's identity crisis. The Patriotic Front, PF, once Zambia's dominant political force, has struggled to redefine itself since Lungu's electoral defeat. Internal divisions, leadership disputes, and dwindling public support have left the party in flux. Yet, Lungu remained a unifying figure. His death, therefore, was not just a personal loss, but a symbolic rupture. Inonge Wina's speech, delivered from the PF Secretariat, was more than a tribute. It was a reclamation of the party's moral authority. By criticizing the government's handling of the funeral, she positioned the PF not as a relic of the past, but as a voice of conscience. 6.3 Wina's warning on toxic politics. Months before Lungu's death, Wina had already expressed concern about Zambia's political climate. In a November 2024 panel discussion, she decried the toxic political environment and lamented the erosion of unity and peace in national discourse. She reminded citizens that Zambia's freedom fighters had fought not with violence, but with solidarity and shared purpose. Her funeral speech echoed these earlier sentiments. The division of mourning locations, the lack of official coordination, and the public's emotional unrest were, in her view, symptoms of a deeper malaise, a political culture that had lost its moral compass. 6.4 The administration's balancing act. For the current government, navigating Lungu's legacy is a delicate task. On one hand, acknowledging his contributions risks reviving the PF's political relevance. On the other, ignoring or minimizing his role invites accusations of pettiness and disrespect. The decision to split mourning locations may have been an attempt to appease multiple constituencies, but it backfired. Instead of demonstrating inclusivity, it was seen as a symbol of division. Wina's speech brought this contradiction into sharp relief. 6.5 The role of memory in politics. In Zambia, as in many post-colonial democracies, political memory is power. How a leader is remembered can shape shape party identities, influence elections, and define national values. Wina's intervention was a reminder that memory is contested terrain, and that silence, too, is a political act. By speaking out, she challenged the government's attempt to control the narrative. She insisted that Lungu's legacy be honored not just in words, but in action, and that the nation's political culture be held to a higher standard. The role of media and public opinion. 7.1 The media awakens. In the hours following Inonge Wina's speech, Zambia's media landscape lit up. Television stations replayed her remarks on loop. Radio hosts dissected her tone, her message, and her motives. Newspapers ran front-page headlines like "Wina speaks for the nation" and "A voice of conscience in a time of silence." The media, long criticized for partisanship or passivity, suddenly became a conduit for national reflection. Wina's words gave journalists permission, perhaps even a mandate, to ask harder questions. Why was the government silent? Why was the funeral fragmented? What does this say about Zambia's political maturity? 7.2 Framing the narrative. Different outlets framed the story in different ways. Pro-government media emphasized Wina's call for unity and downplayed her criticism. Independent and opposition-aligned outlets highlighted her rebuke of the administration and framed it as a watershed moment in Zambian politics. This divergence in framing is a textbook example of agenda-setting theory, the idea that media doesn't tell people what to think, but what to think about. By choosing which parts of Wina's speech to amplify, media outlets shaped the contours of public debate. 7.3 The social media surge. If traditional media lit the match, social media poured on the fuel. Within minutes of Wina's speech, clips were circulating on WhatsApp, Facebook, and X, formerly Twitter. Hashtags like #WinaSpeaks, #HonorLungu, and #Dignity in Death trended across Zambia and the diaspora. Users shared personal reflections, memes, and even poetry inspired by her words. Some posted side-by-side videos comparing Wina's speech to past presidential tributes, highlighting what they saw as a decline in state decorum. Others used the moment to call for broader reforms in how Zambia treats its former leaders. 7.4 Citizen journalism and the rise of the digital mourner. In the absence of timely government communication, citizen journalists filled the void. Live streams from the PF Secretariat reached thousands. Independent bloggers posted real-time updates. TikTok creators stitched together timelines of events, offering commentary and context. This grassroots coverage created a new kind of public figure, the digital mourner, someone who not only grieved but also documented, analyzed, and mobilized. Their voices added emotional depth and political urgency to the national conversation. 7.5 Public opinion crystallizes. Polls conducted in the days following the speech showed a sharp uptick in public dissatisfaction with the government's handling of the funeral. Editorials called for a national protocol on state funerals. Civil society groups demanded a truthful account of the delay, and ordinary citizens, from market vendors to university students, echoed Wina's call for dignity and unity. The media didn't just reflect this shift, it accelerated it. By giving Wina's speech wall-to-wall coverage, they turned a single voice into a chorus of national conscience. 7.6 The double-edged sword. But media influence is never neutral. Some outlets sensationalized the story, framing it as a political showdown rather than a moment of mourning. Others spread misinformation, including false claims about government sabotage or internal PF conspiracies. This underscores the double-edged nature of media power. It can inform and inspire, but also mislead and divide. As one editorial put it, in the age of viral grief, truth must travel faster than rumor. Mourning as protest. 8.1 The emotional landscape. In the days following Edgar Lungu's death, Zambia was awash in sorrow. But beneath the surface of grief lay something more volatile: frustration, confusion, and a sense of betrayal. The government's delayed response and fragmented funeral arrangements didn't just disappoint, they ignited a wave of emotional resistance. For many, mourning became a form of protest. People didn't just cry, they questioned. They didn't just gather, they organized. And in that space between sorrow and outrage, a new kind of civic energy emerged. 8.2 The streets speak. Across Lusaka and other major cities, spontaneous gatherings turned into vigils of dissent. Mourners held candles in one hand and placards in the other. Messages like "Dignity in Death," "One Zambia, One Mourning," and "Respect Our Leaders" appeared on posters, t-shirts, and social media banners. These weren't orchestrated political rallies. They were organic expressions of collective grief and discontent. People from all walks of life, students, clergy, market vendors, retired civil servants, came together not just to honor Lungu, but to demand accountability from those in power. 8.3 Wina's speech as a rallying cry. Inonge Wina's speech became the emotional and rhetorical anchor of this movement. Her words were quoted in chants, printed on banners, and replayed on loudspeakers at memorial sites. One line in particular, "Why two places? Why not one Zambia, one mourning?" became a unifying slogan. Her call for dignity, unity, and restraint resonated deeply, but it also emboldened citizens to speak out. If the former vice president could challenge the government in a moment of grief, so could they. 8.4 Cultural context. Mourning as a sacred act. In Zambian culture, mourning is not not just a private affair, it is a sacred communal ritual. It involves storytelling, song, prayer, and shared silence. To politicize or mishandle this process is seen not just as disrespectful, but as a violation of cultural norms. By dividing the mourning locations and delaying official communication, the government was perceived as disrupting a sacred national right. This cultural breach added fuel to the fire, transforming sorrow into resistance. 8.5 Digital mourning, digital mobilization. Online, the grief took on new forms. TikTok users created montages of Lungu's speeches set to somber music. Twitter/X threads chronicled his achievements and controversies. Facebook groups became hubs for organizing vigils and sharing updates. But these platforms also became spaces for mobilization. Petitions were launched demanding a national protocol for state funerals. Hashtags like #MourningIsNotPolitical and #HonorOurLeaders trended for days. The digital mourner had become a digital activist. 8.6 Government response. Caution and contradiction. Faced with this wave of emotional protest, the government walked a tightrope. Some officials called for calm and unity. Others dismissed the outcry as politically motivated. But Wina herself urged restraint, not just from the public, but from the state. In a televised interview, she said, "The heart of a mourner is heavy and their spirit is confused. The words spoken by those in mourning do not always reflect reality." Her message was clear. Grief must be met with empathy, not retaliation. 8.7 Mourning as a mirror. Ultimately, the public mourning of Edgar Lungu became a mirror, reflecting not just the nation's sorrow, but its fractured politics, cultural values, and yearning for unity. It showed that in Zambia, mourning is never just about the past. It's about the future. It's about who we are and who we want to become. What happens next? 9.1 A nation at a crossroads. The passing of Edgar Lungu and the emotional fallout that followed have left Zambia at a pivotal juncture. The country is not just mourning a former president. It is confronting questions about how it honors its leaders, how it manages political transitions, and how it defines national unity in an increasingly polarized landscape. Inonge Wina's speech didn't just reflect the mood of the moment, it reshaped it.